Hey everybody, it's Matt with Minis of Maine, and today we're going to be talking about spark plugs and spark plug modules for third generation minis, but also it'll kind of cover second gens as well. So this is the inside of a third generation Mini F56S. There's some parts missing. There's an air intake that should go here, air intake that should go up here. It's out right now for some service. So while I've got the car apart, I'm going to be doing the spark plugs. Now normally there's a decorative cover that goes over the top of this. This is the 2-liter turbo motor. And then Mini uses direct injection motors. And with the direct injection motors, they use a spark plug module and a spark plug. And basically you've got a module here, and then there's one under the sponge cover, and there's one under this sponge cover as well. Now in the third gen minis, they use an E8 torque fitting to keep the module in place. Don't need a lot of pressure on those to tighten them down or undo them. If you're going to be replacing the module itself, there's a clip here that comes undone. If you're just doing the service for spark plugs, there's no need to disconnect the cables. We're just going to pull these modules, swap the plug, and then move forward. Okay, so what I've done is I've undone the bolt that holds the module into place with that E8 Torx fitting, and then this bolt stays captured in the plug module. And then to replace just the plugs, all we're going to do is we're going to grab it and we're going to pull it up, and you'll hear it pop. Okay, and that's what the module looks like. Okay, and to replace the plugs, we can leave it plugged in. So we're just going to rest it to the side. Then what we're going to do is, down in there is the spark plug. It's always a good idea to check inside, look for any fluid or oil. There's none. It's good, nice and dry. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the plug out, put the new plug in, pop this module back in place, and then just snug this little bolt down. And that's one plug. Then you just replace each of them one by one. Now if you're replacing the module, you just unplug this clip. This whole module gets replaced. And then plug it back in and then pop it back down on top of the spark plug. So one of the things I typically like to do too is I like to clean up a little bit with a vacuum right around the top. Because once the modules come off, it's a little grungy in there. So for third gen cars, you've got this module here. It's got the torque fitting bolt. It's got the side capture plug for the electrical. And then the rubber sleeve comes down, and this part here fits over the top of the spark plug. Now in the second gen cars, you've got this module has this clasp here like this. And these sit down on top of the motor like so. And to undo them, you pry this lever up and it pushes the connector off the back of the module, and then the module the same way, the module pulls up out of the motor. Now one thing you want to do on these is just check the condition of them if you're replacing your plugs. So with modules on an S Mini or JCW Mini, any of the tuned minis, Mini recommends that these modules be replaced every 75,000 to 100,000 miles. You're always going to want to replace them in sets of 4. You're not going to want to do the onesie-twosies because you're going to be chasing gremlins left and right. So just replace them in sets of 4 between 75 and 100,000 miles. Plugs on S Minis and also JCWs, they should be replaced at about 30,000 miles. And that's the routine I follow, and it's been pretty good so far. So on the third gens, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to replace all 4 spark plugs. Like I said, with the S Minis or tuned minis, JCWs, 30,000 miles, you should replace these plugs. They really need to get taken out and changed. Direct engine motors are pretty tough on plugs. With the minis, it's always good to have this. This is a Schwaben 14 millimeter. It's a star magnetic thin-walled socket. It's good for getting down inside the cylinder head to get the spark plugs out. The other thing that you have to have, and you really need to do it, is you need a good torque wrench. There's lots of things you can do on a Mini without a torque wrench. Spark plugs is definitely not something that you want to play around with without a torque wrench. Some people just firm them up. The problem with a plug is it's got very specific requirements. So on the Minis, you're looking at about 20 pound-feet of torque on the plugs, which isn't a lot. If you under-tighten it, you don't get a good seal. The plug can work its way loose. It can fire itself out of the cylinder. If you go too tight and you crank it down, it's very easy to break the ceramic resistor, and you damage the plug even before you've run it. So take your time, get a good torque wrench, know how to set it properly, and then use the torque wrench when replacing the plugs. And always replace in sets of 4. The other thing I like to do is, I'm a little bit kind of anal about this, but I have a spark plug gap tool. These plugs here come pre-gapped. So all the new plugs with all the Minis come pre-gapped. The problem is sometimes these get damaged in shipping, or maybe something gets swapped in there by mistake. I always like to just check the gap. So on the Mini, it's 0.8 millimeters. I've already checked the gap on all 4 of these, so we're good to go. This way we know the plugs are gapped properly, the modules are healthy, the plugs are torqued correctly. It kind of narrows down if we have any other problems that might materialize. So when I started running the club in 2015, one of the things that really surprised me about Minis in general is a lot of people are having all kinds of run-related issues, like rough idle, check engine lights. And one of the things that I found is changing spark plugs, and then also like where the air filter is here, keeping the air filter fresh and clean, changing your plugs every 30,000 miles, changing your modules every 75,000 miles. You're going to really offset any rough idle or run conditions that you might experience with your Mini. You're just going to keep it running fresh and in tip-top shape, and you're just going to reduce all of those potential problems. So good preventative maintenance. Check your oil, clean engine oil, check your radiator fluids, clean your air filters, change your plugs every 30,000 miles, and your Mini will run like a champ. Okay, so I've undone the plug, and basically what I always like to do is just kind of take a look at it. And it should be dusty brown, and this is definitely dusty brown. And these have 30,000 miles on them, and I'm going to swap them out. They could probably still go like another 10 or 15, but I'm not going to play around. I just like to keep the plugs fresh. I've had 0 problems with my Minis doing it this way, and it's a pretty inexpensive endeavor when I do it myself. So the plug just slides into the socket, and it's got a little magnet in there, holds it in place. So when you go to put it back into the motor, it's not going to slip out on you. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to want to load the new one up into the socket, and then you're going to gently lower it down into the cylinder head, and you're going to thread it into the motor. Now, when you thread a spark plug into a motor, it should spin with your fingers pretty much all the way down to its base. If there's any kind of resistance at all, you've cross-threaded it. There should not be any resistance on the plug going into the cylinder head until it hits its base and you need to snug it up to the torque spec. So you should be able to spin it in freely all the way in place. Okay, so the plug is down in the cylinder head, and I finger tightened it all the way to the base. So as you can see, it's finger tight right to the base. I do not put any lubricant on the threads or thread lock or anti-seize. A dry thread is going to give you your better torque rating on a spark plug, so I always just do the dry plug right into the cylinder head. And like I said, you should finger tighten it down and then torque it into place. Okay, so the new plug's down in the cylinder, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take the module And the way that it orients, it's going to slide it into the hole, and then your bolt on the back of the module here goes down on top of the bolt that's in the valve cover assembly. And you're going to just push it down into place till you feel it pop. And then you're going to finger tighten this on top of the module. Again, it's the E8. And then you don't want to put a lot of torque on these. That's plenty. So we have the venturi air intake back in place, the intro duct and the main filter assembly. Got the cover back on. Plugs have been swapped over. So again, spark plugs every 30,000 miles on S models, tuned minis, or JCWs. And then for modules, you're going to want to make sure 75,000 to 100,000, they should be swapped. And in general, you just want to make sure you get a torque wrench, torque them correctly, and you'll have countless miles of trouble-free driving if you keep your filters, plugs, and oil changed and clean. Goes a long way to making these cars run well.